A couple things. If you have not read the Antiquities Act itself, I would just ask as a background you do. It's fairly short. It's less than a page. But it really states three things. And I'll agree that the Antiquities Act over time has done great things for our country, and it has protected some of our greatest treasures. But the Antiquities Act itself really has three parts. One is you need an object to protect. And the object is either scientific, prehistoric, historic. Secondly, it applies only to federal land in authority, in that you cannot make a monument over state or private land, and the monument review does not transfer or sell or bring out of any status of land. It was a federal estate beginning. It will remain part of the federal estate. And lastly, and perhaps in some minds more importantly, the creation of a monument has to be smallest area compatible with protection of the object. Now, as the president tasked me, we have about over 150 monuments. The president asked me to look at 27 of them. There were 100,000 acres and more. And my recommendation was to revise the boundaries of 4 and look at 10 where the proclamations either did not fit the law, were inconsistent with the governor, the state legislature, the congressional delegation, and I'll give you some examples. Objects. Some of the objects looked at, I'll give you one, was a World War II bombing crater that you could only see from Google Earth. And when I was shown the picture, it was expressed the bombing crater looked like a battleship. Personally, I thought it looked like Jesus, but it did not raise the occasion of an object. And from a former SEAL commander, if in fact there's a bombing range on formerly a BLM land, it should be swept for unexplosive ordnance. Other objects in question were stars, biological diversity, remoteness, emptiness. In the case of Bear's Ears and Staircase Alante, we looked at it, and bear in mind, Bear's Ears was 1.5 million acres. And within Bear's Ears was a national forest, wilderness study area, and an earlier monument in which Teddy Roosevelt designated in the turn of the 19th century. Even after the revision, after identifying objects, and there are objects within Bear's Ears, there are primarily objects of cultural significance to the local tribes. Those objects were identified in concert with the state natural resources experts, but the objects could be identified, they could be segregated, and the revised boundaries still are larger than Bryce Canyon and Zion combined. For some of those folks, that on the scale of the property, that's still 350 square miles. In the case of Staircase Escalante, the revised boundaries are 1,500 square miles, which is 1,000,000 acres. The interior's position is public lands are for public use and not special interests. The Antiquities Act was designed to protect rather than prevent. And no president under the authority of the Antiquities Act has the authority to arbitrarily remove the public from their lands, reduce public access, reduce hunting and fishing, and reduce traditional uses unless those uses threaten the object. The president was absolutely right in asking for a review. No one loves public land more than I. But what I do love is public lands being available for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. And we disagree vehemently on shutting roads down, shutting access down. In one case of the review, all motorized vehicles was stopped until a transportation plan was put in at a time undetermined. And it had effect of even stopping groomed trails for cross-country skiing. Roads have been shut down, not officially, but lack of maintenance. And when a road is not maintained, culverts aren't replaced, then the access for hunters and fishermen and people that just want to use the land is shut down. Mountain bikes, wheeled game carts, and also conservation efforts. For those that are familiar with the sage grouse, is that the lack of the ability to actively manage the lands, to include removal of brush, of cedars, of scrub, results in a lack of habitat for the sage grouse, particularly the junipers, and it also inhibits wildlife, that is elk or deer. So once again, the president was correct in his asking for a review, and public lands are for the public use and not special interests. I've seen the press hits. No land, not 1 square inch of land has been transferred or sold. This is not about energy. There is no oil and gas assets. There is no mine within the Bears Ears Monument before or after. So the argument that somehow that President Trump stole land is nefarious, false, and a lie. So with that, I look forward to your questions, and we'll begin.
We will now begin the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please press star 1. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. To withdraw your request, press star 2. Please stand by for your first question. The first question comes from Jim Carlton with the Wall Street Journal. Your line is open.
Hey, Secretary Zinke. I hope you got some rest after yesterday's marathon trip.
I did. I even had time to work out this morning.
My question, I don't know if you've seen this, but Patagonia put a statement on its website that the president stole your land, and they called the monument reductions illegal. So I know there's been a lot of criticism from some tribes out there, also environmentalists, but now the outdoor recreation industry. So I was just going to ask you, what's your reaction to the Patagonia statement specifically, and generally, what would you tell the outdoor recreation people who complain these reductions will hurt their outdoors experience?
You mean Patagonia made in China? This is an example of a special interest. Is to suggest that stole the land. What 1 square inch was stolen? The federal estate remains intact. And yesterday's actions in Bears Ears, when you restore the national forest to a national forest within Bears Ears, you restore wilderness study areas to a wilderness study areas within Bears Ears. When you restore public access, after you restore the lands that are not appropriate to protect an object given the law, Bears Ears remains larger than Zion and Bryce Canyon combined. nearly 250,000 acres. Further, the fact that on the other lands, no protections of antiquities are removed. Protections exist on every square inch of federal land. But what is different is that we are going to actively manage the properties to ensure we don't have catastrophic forest fires, to make sure our wildlife remains healthy. So I understand fundraising for these special interest groups. I think it's shameful and appalling that they would blatantly lie in order to gain money in their coffers. And by the way, Jim, I don't yield to pressure, only higher principle. And sound public policy is not based on threats of lawsuit. It's doing what's right.